All right, as promised, we are here just about 12 or less than 12 hours after the Bucks wrapped up their championship. Great clinching game. This is Dome Theory. He is Sean Highkin here from Bleacher Report. You know him as one of the leading guys covering the NBA, longtime Bulls writer. First time I've had him on Dome Theory, so welcome, Sean.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I've enjoyed the finals. I'm excited to talk about some Lillard here. That really got me going last week, those trade rumors. I don't know how likely it is we'll see a trade here this offseason, but first on these finals, we were just talking before we came on here. Giannis, I love the guy. I did an episode with Mir and Fader. I think lots of people have done podcasts with Mir and Fader in recent weeks. As
she's doing the tour. I need to get. I mean, Mira and I know each other pretty well. I need to text her. I mean, I'm sure she has a million people hitting her up, but I need to make sure I get that book before I go to Vegas for Summer League, because I think it's coming out like around the same time. So I need to make sure I have it in time to read it on the flight.
I don't think there's been a more perfect roll-up for a book, because we found out about this book at the beginning of the playoffs. They blew through the Heat. They had that iconic series with the Nets, and then it just kept building and building and snowballing, and you got the bits and pieces and the podcast appearances, and it just felt more and more with each round that went by like they could actually do this. And like, the book's going to come out just weeks after he wins the championship. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that.
So I'll actually do you one better. She announced the book back in they put up the pre-order link back in like December. I'm pretty sure she put it up the day, and this was not planned because I don't think she knew ahead of time that this was happening. I'm pretty sure she announced to the public that the book was coming out the day that he signed the extension back in December.
Unreal. And that's where this all started, right? So
yeah,
you had the Drew Holiday trade, 5 first-round picks going over. Everybody's like, oh, that's a lot, but is it going to lock them up? Then all of a sudden the Bogdanovich trade, which really, I've been talking about that the last few weeks. The fact that they pushed through and won in spite of, honestly, I felt like the league screwed them a little bit in that situation, just kind of trying to make a statement to everybody else, sending Bogdanovich back to Sacramento. The fact that they overcame that, Dante DiVincenzo's injury, I don't think he played in the playoffs at all.
He played like the first 2 games of the Miami series, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
He had the injury.
And then on top of that, like, not a ton of depth here. Giannis's injury in the Eastern Conference Finals in a 2-2 series. They had to overcome a lot. You always catch some breaks, but they overcame a lot here. And that Bogdanovich thing, to me, not a ton of people are talking about it today, but that was one of the first things I thought of, is that they don't get him. They lose DiVincenzo, who they would have been sending out in that deal. They scrap it together with Bobby Portis. Pat Connaughton has unimaginable playoffs here, and it couldn't have gone any better for this team in spite of lots of stuff that they've gone through.
You want to talk about a ripple effect of the Bogdan thing. Bobby Portis was like part of their contingency after that whole thing blew up in their face and they weren't able to get him. Then they kind of had to panic, and by then a lot of the signing, like all the other players they maybe would have gone after had kind of agreed to deals already. And so then they signed Bobby as part of like their backup. And then he's arguably the most important role player that they have outside of the main 3 guys in this finals, or maybe through this entire playoff run.
Last night in particular, unreal performance by him. Mm-hmm. Finishing at the basket, hitting guys with some up fakes, playing good defense. He was electric.
Personally very happy because I back when I was covering the Bulls was back when Bobby was on the team, so I actually know him pretty well. I'm very happy for him getting this, and it was awesome. Like, I don't know if you saw the NBA TV interviewed last night where it was him and Connaughton together, and Bobby was just drinking champagne out of the bottle during the interview, and just
That's another thing to love about this too, and it's interesting because I went to public school here on the North Shore of Boston, right near where he went to private school, and there's kind of a little beef between the 2 schools there, St. John's where he went, and Peabody High where I went.
Is this Connaughton?
Yeah, Connaughton, and I still feel good for him, even though he's a prep guy. Not a lot of people. There's not a lot of love for Pat Connaughton here in Peabody, or the prep here in Peabody, but him coming out of there, Arlington, Mass. I think he shot over 40% in these playoffs. He wasn't that great in the last few games here, but for the thick of this playoff race, after his run in Portland there. He ended up being a critical rotation guy. They were getting 30 minutes out of him some nights. I think him, Brook Lopez, what he was able to do in that Brooklyn series in terms of rim protection, and then, of course, being like the go-to offensive guy when Giannis went down. And as you mentioned there, the Portis contributions, those are like the big three depth contributions that you need on a championship run. And all three of those guys I thought were incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it really came down to their role players outplayed Phoenix's role players. Like, I mean, Jay Crowder had some big games, and, you know, Cam Johnson was pretty good at different points, but it was really like you look at and going into the series, one of the big reasons I don't know what you picked before the series. I picked Phoenix just because I didn't know what Giannis's health.
I think that's where pretty much everybody was at.
Status was going to be, but part of the reason that I was, felt good about Phoenix going into the series before we knew kind of what Giannis was going to do was that I just felt like that team outside of Chris Paul, Devin Booker, DeAndre Ayton, those guys were every one of their role players knew exactly what their role was, and they all did that. And I just gave so much credit to Monty Williams for the job that he did throughout the playoffs, getting them to the finals in the first place. I thought that advantage was going to play in their favor during the finals. It turns out that's exactly what it, especially because there was all this stuff during the other rounds of the playoffs about how, some of the coaching stuff with Bud and how he didn't adjust and how he was playing certain guys or not playing Giannis enough.
Horrible in the Brooklyn series.
All of this stuff. And he managed to actually adjust to all the stuff that he was supposed to adjust to. And I think all the kind of things that maybe the conventional wisdom was that he was going to, fall victim to in the finals, where he was going to be too stubborn and not willing to change stuff up when he had to. That wasn't true at all.
Yeah, would he keep leaning on Jeff Teague minutes? Would he not play Brook enough? I thought Brook was involved just enough in this series. They played the perfect balance between him, Portis, Connaughton in rotation there. And, we can talk about all these role guys all we want. There was a mass push among some for Chris Middleton to win MVP, which surprisingly didn't come to fruition in the end here.
Well,
should we talk about that for a minute? The Middleton MVP truthers.
Do we even need to talk about that? I mean, I think so. Does Giannis get gifted with a bag now? He didn't have a bag before, apparently. Is he now a hooper as opposed to just a basketball player?
I would hope some would realize it, especially when you get into the line as much as he does, and then
that's my favorite
in the clinching game, hitting 17 and 19 from the line. That's honestly a pretty good feather in the cap.
That was my favorite part of the game last night. Yes. It kind of sucked. Normally when somebody had that many free throw attempts, it just kind of drags the game down, and it's kind of a slog to watch. But it was pretty cool to watch Giannis just hit all of those free throws. Like you said, 17 for 19 after what the discourse has been about him throughout the playoffs as far as free throws, and to see him do that in a closeout game, that was just like another fun part of that whole thing last night. I've never had more fun watching somebody shoot free throws.
I think a lot of things about him are fun, and that's why you're gonna have to take me through the perspective of people who don't like Giannis, because I feel like their biggest point is that he's not fun to watch, or it's all brute force or overpowering and free throws, and that's the gauge I get from it. But I feel the opposite about it. I think his length and the way he reaches the basket in like 2 steps is wicked fun to watch. The spin moves I love, the vicious dunks, and then the defense just kind of speaks for itself. He does everything out there. At the very end of this finals, it felt like the only thing he couldn't do was hit the three. That was it. And he didn't need it.
Yeah, he doesn't need it. I don't feel like everybody needs to have every skill. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I'm the right person to take you through the perspective of somebody who doesn't like Giannis, because I'm right there with you. I think it's pretty impossible not to like the guy.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll see where the perception goes now in the wake of his finals, because even after Game 5, that big win that they had there, and the incredible dunk at the end, I think he had about 3-4 iconic moments in this finals that we'll go through here. Even then, it's like, oh, Middleton hit the last shot. And I guess Middleton hit the key shot down the stretch of Game 6 here, too. But NBA Finals MVP isn't decided in like 6 minutes of crunch time. There's a whole, series of 48-minute games here, and you go down his game log here, 50 in the clincher. His stat line in that game had never been done. I don't think his stat line in the finals has been done. I didn't check that one, but just, with one leg, pretty damaged here, it seems, from the Atlanta series. 20, 42, 41, 26, 32, 50. He pretty much had 25 showing up in these playoffs every single game.
There was kind of the stat of like who has, averaged what he averaged in the finals. And it's basically just like him and Jordan in terms of like points, rebounds. I don't remember the exact numbers off the top of my head, but
the like rebounds are too high for Jordan. That's the thing. Like every single stat line you go down here, and this is why he's 1-on-1. The assists, pretty high for a center. Like you go back to Wilt, he had a few big like assist runs, but his scoring was down during those years. Giannis was able to keep his assist rate to a point where his 30-point per game scoring was unmatched between like facilitating and scoring. And then when you throw in, elite center rebounding, like this guy is alone. And then the defense on top of it, being able to guard the wings. There's no comparison for this guy.
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything like this before. Like last night on the broadcast, they showed a side-by-side image. I don't know if you saw this at some point on ESPN last night. They showed this on the broadcast of what Giannis looked like coming into the league, like his rookie year versus what he looks like now. And it's like he's grown. Not only has he grown like 7 inches, but he's also just so much more
60 pounds
built now than he was. And it's just, they look like two different people, except for like they have the same face. It was pretty wild.
So while I was watching the game and I saw that, and I see him going at DeAndre and time again, which blows my mind in this series because I watched Ayton a lot in college. And the one thing that stuck out to me about him in college is he could get wherever he wanted, whenever he wanted, just sheer will, one of the most forceful college players I've ever seen.
He's a big dude, too. I've been in the locker rooms and seen him up close.
To see him not only look small next to Giannis, but look completely overpowered time and time again, following him every time he comes at him. Just getting blown by on the perimeter when he did come out. It's like I was watching the game, and as the Bucks took over in that third quarter, I'm sitting there and I'm wondering, what can the Suns do? There's no wing guy that can sizably match up with him. Ayton's getting pummeled here. Finally, I'm like, all right, Kaminsky, just give it a shot. And it did all right, but it wasn't an answer. And really, the Suns probably didn't have an answer for this, did they?
I don't know if enough people are even talking about this. And I don't know if it necessarily would have like been the difference, but it would have helped. But losing Dario Saric early on in the series was, because you need to have more big bodies who, because, all due respect to Frank Kaminsky, that was like going from Saric to him was not like that. That's not what you want if you're Monty Williams. And so
was that a real series swing point?
I think that might be a little bit strong, but I think it would have helped to have him for sure. Yeah.
So we'll spend a minute on the Suns here too, because there's some big questions with them. Will they be back? Obviously, is the big one here in a loaded West with teams getting better and everything like that. But really, first, how did it go so wrong for them? Because they dominate game one. Giannis wasn't obviously right for that one. But then with how Booker was playing, Paul was facilitating. And honestly, Ayton was really involved and active early in the series. A 2-game lead in this, having home court still, even after the Milwaukee losses. You think they would have been in a pretty good spot, at least to push this to 7. And, not many teams have collapsed the way they have with a 2-0 lead in the finals here. I feel like we might hear at some point that Paul was banged up more than we thought. He was all right in the later portion of the series. I didn't love Booker's games down the stretch of the series. He's still a guy that can score at will, but I feel like he got a little tunnel vision down the stretch here. And, what happened to Ayton was obvious. He just kind of got fouled out of the series, to be honest.
Yeah, that was. And even there were even some fouls that like Giannis is kind of like Shaq or LeBron, where you could call a foul against you. He could draw a foul on every possession because the only way to slow him down is just to hammer him. As far as Chris Paul is concerned, yeah, we might hear that he was hurt or whatever. I think a thing we have to talk about, I think, more than people have been talking about. And I'm surprised that this hasn't gotten talked about as much as it maybe should. And I don't want to say that this is entirely what caused, him to kind of wear down as the series went on. He did have COVID, like, during the conference finals. And even though, he's vaccinated, and so his symptoms of the actual COVID weren't, there the way they would have been maybe if he hadn't been vaccinated. That's still, like, when you're at this level, you have to, everything you do, your entire day and your entire life is built around doing the exact right things at the exact right time in order to keep yourself in the kind of shape you have to be in to play in the NBA playoffs at this level. And so for him to, at the height of the conference finals, have a week where he had to isolate and couldn't really do it, be in his normal, like, workout regimen and be in his normal rhythm and practice with, like, I don't think that was, like, the entire reason that he didn't have a great finals, because obviously, you have to give a lot of credit to Drew Holiday too, but I think that might have played more of a factor than people are talking about.
I did sense an extended bench hiatus for him in this last game. When I think of those things you mentioned there too, there were moments where it felt like he was just kind of lost in the shuffle, not actively involved. I think that's the thing we've seen with some COVID guys, is them just not being able to have the burst and really that motor that Giannis displayed there to just make play after play deep into these games and persist. And that was what was most impressive about Giannis. And I think that actually is a pretty good answer for Paul there in terms of what happened to him, because he was by and far away the MVP of this series through 2 games. And then, essentially
they had us in the first half, not going to lie.
Yeah. There were moments where he had to defer to Booker. And like, I love where Booker's gone. I was always skeptical of his game and him being able to be like a winning player. I think he changed that to a large degree this year, and of course in the bubble too. But you'd still much rather have the ball in Paul's hands, making plays and minimizing the amount of time that Booker has to be your pick and roll playmaker and find guys and hit Ayton again and again too, which I think is where they got lost too. They weren't able to find him consistently in good spots down the stretch of the series.
Yeah, the Booker, I'm kind of with you. I turned around on Booker really during the bubble, but then especially he was so good for most of the finals. But yeah, I think he got a little bit too much tunnel vision. And, when you had, I think if Paul had been more effective, then maybe that would have, like, put Booker in. And I don't want to blame Paul for this, because again, I think that the COVID, played a factor in all. It's unfortunate. This is one of those series, and I've been doing this professionally too long to really be rooting for anybody. But I would have been perfect. I would have been really happy for a lot of people if Phoenix, like, I would have been happy for Chris. I would have been happy for Monty. I would have been happy for, like, a lot of people in that, on that team. So, like, I'm not one of these guys.
Dollar bills,
right?
Would you have been
I don't know if I would have been happy for that guy. I think that guy was a plant, by the way. But
no way, really?
I think that guy was a plant.
If he was, it was a very creative setup.
Yeah.
So either way, you feel pretty good about that. That was amazing. That was the other thing in the series. Phoenix fans, I thought the atmosphere in Milwaukee was better. The atmosphere in Phoenix was wackier to a large degree, and it contributed to a lot more crowd shots. There were some characters in there, game in and game out, really, in Phoenix. So it's almost too bad we didn't get the Game 7 in that regard.
And Rich Paul and Adele made their debut as a couple.
Yep. LeBron out there trying to make it LeBron's game. Could have predicted that one. Other things in this series. Drew Holiday. Trade was obviously worth it. Kept Giannis around. Impactful defensive player to the highest degree at that position. I think a lot of people who maybe didn't see him in New Orleans early in his career really got a view of just how transformative he can be. And that steal on Booker, along with the finish on the other end, ultimately is going to go down as one of the best plays ever. That lob, man, I'm watching that play. It's a situation where you would want them to run down the clock and eat a foul, and he just fires it away. Like, there was no shot clock. They could have just eaten a foul in that spot, hit the free throws, and ended it the normal way. And they just said, all right, we'll risk it all here and go for that. And Giannis was completely off balance. Man, that play, he didn't have a great series, Drew, but that sequence there made it all worth it.
And the job he did. I mean, he didn't have a great series offensively, but the job he did
Yes.
defensively on Chris for most of the series, once they stuck him on him, I mean, I think you can't really say that wasn't a difference.
Well,
maker
that's
this
the
year.
balance you're working with there, and this is what we talked about when they were kind of on the brink against Brooklyn. There, the balance between, all right, do you trade 5 firsts and dump all that salary and whatever they had to do there to get Holiday, or figure out a way to go after Paul?
Well,
Paul.
my understanding is that Giannis didn't really want Chris. I think he was more excited about the idea of playing with Drew than he was with Chris. That's
Just from the defensive identity, probably.
Yeah, and I don't know. Maybe like some personality stuff. I don't know. I just
could be that maybe becomes Paul's team rather
that's
than
something
Giannis's
I've heard.
team.
That's something I've heard is that Giannis's preference was Drew.
Fair enough. And Suns have some questions to answer here in terms of his future. He's probably not going to opt into the player option.
Oh no, he's getting one more big contract. I don't know. Maybe that's with Phoenix. Maybe that's with somebody else. I'm sure the Knicks would probably, given the CAA ties, I'm sure and the fact that the Knicks love, swinging at big names. I could see that. I could see, I don't know how the Lakers would make the cap space thing work, but that him and LeBron are tight. So I could see that. But if he wants to stay in Phoenix, I know that he's on the downside of his career and he is going to be 37 next year. If you're Phoenix, I feel like you kind of have to just pay him and keep him around if he wants to stay around.
Yeah, you have no alternative if you're Phoenix. There's a chance if you lose him, you could just go back to being the bottom half playoff team at best. Because
here's the thing. You've got to pay Bridges this summer. You've got to pay Ayton this summer. So that's not like if they lose Chris, then they're going to just have all this money to go and sign somebody else. They got to pay some of these other guys. Booker's already making a ton of money. I think if he wants to leave, then if he wants to go either to New York or LA or somewhere else, then there's nothing you can do about that. But if he wants to stick around, you pay him whatever it takes to keep him around.
$39 million? Is that what we're talking here?
He got you to the final. I mean, well, again, what do you do if you don't re-sign him?
No, there's not a great option here.
You don't have an option. It's not like I don't know. Although you know what, I could kind of see and I know they didn't get back to the finals the next year, but I see kind of the vision of the Raptors trade for Kawhi as a 1-year rental, win the title, he bounces, and then they're still pretty good the next year. They took Boston to 7 in the second round. They of the playoffs the following year, they were still pretty good the whole year. I could see Phoenix with some of the development of these young guys of how much better Booker's gotten, how much better Ayton and Bridges and even guys like Cam Johnson have gotten. I could see a world where Chris leaves and then they just run back the rest of the team, and maybe they're not title contender. They don't go to the finals next year, but they're still a second round team or a conference finals team, and they're still pretty good, and then just kind of build from there. I could see that happening. Monty's a good enough coach that I trust him to kind of get it back there.
You could, and it would probably take a slight step back and then maybe a step forward into the future once those guys get there. You probably just want to keep this treadmill going here with this core 3 because you see their upside here, especially when they're right. It's just tough if that contract starts to give a negative returns toward 40. Because, again, in Houston, the talk already started, and it wasn't right. It was a bad evaluation by Houston that, this contract isn't good. We got to get off that. And that would be even less than what he would be looking at making here. What do you think are the most likely scenarios here if we're going to rank them? I hear the Lakers fans chatting and saying maybe he takes less money and goes out to LA and does something out there. I can't see that. I think what you said is probably the most likely thing here. Either he comes back to Phoenix on a huge deal or he takes all that Knicks cap space and he does the Leon Rose thing out there and becomes that point guard that they've needed so badly. Is there any other alternatives that you could see?
The Lakers thing is interesting. I don't see him taking less money because I don't think that's something that the president of the Players Union is going to do. But I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a scenario where they open up cap space, move off of KCP or something. I don't have their salary cap situation off the top of my head, but LeBron would probably like that I know LeBron would probably try to find a way to make that happen. So I think that's in play, but I It's above my pay grade to decide like what the salary cap machinations of this kind of stuff would be.
Yeah, I mean, the Schroeder thing is kind of what's outstanding in LA. Does anyone want that guy's to sign and trade return? Phoenix probably doesn't.
I wouldn't think so, no.
Toronto and a Lowry case, I don't know. I thought that might be interesting, but I don't see that either.
They're paying Van Vliet a ton of money. They're paying OG. They're paying I don't know.
So that's the situation LA's in. I mean, it looked like a heist when they got Schroeder for what they did. It looked great throughout the year, and now it's like, oh, can we find this guy a $25 million deal somewhere else and bring another guy in? It's going to be a lot for them. I think he's going to be back there. But yeah, Paul probably back in Phoenix. Slight chance of the Knicks thing going on. Other things from this series that stand out. Obviously, 0-2 deficits in Milwaukee's case is impressive and historic, I thought. But really the biggest thing of all is the turnaround for Coach Bud, who who got his flowers from all kinds of media types and went from getting
basically, if they had lost that Brooklyn series, he was going to be fired, and now he's probably going to get an extension now, and you can't really get mad at that if they won the title.
How do you ultimately feel about the job he did throughout the course of this? I know you like the turnaround here, but were people too harsh on him before, or was it just kind of right the whole time, and Giannis just overcame everything that Bud might have been holding him back with?
I do think that the coaching job improved as the playoffs went along, and I think that a lot of the criticisms of him early on in the playoffs were fair, and I think that a lot of the credit that he's getting in the finals is deserved. And I mean, they won a title, so there's not really too much you can say about it.
There you go. Jeff Van Gundy's the slanderous comments are over for Coach Bud, at least for now. We'll see. What is the future of this Bucks team ultimately? You look at their books. It's perfect. Giannis locked up. Drew locked up. Middleton, they'll have a tough decision on him in 2023 probably, because he's a little bit underpaid right now in terms of what he is and what he's proven here on this run. But for the next 2 years, you're good with him. They'll be right there. There's probably some sentiment that if the Nets are fully healthy and motivated and frustrated with the loss from this year, they'll blow by them. And I think that is ultimately the most interesting scenario there if those two teams meet again, what that would look like. But in terms of the Hawks, they're coming. They're a nice team. I think you pretty much saw where both of them are at in that series. The Celtics still have a ton to figure out here. And, when it comes to Tatum, Brown, and Giannis is just echelons above. Toronto's decent. Knicks are decent. So it's kind of just the Bucks and Nets, I'd imagine, here in the East.
We'll see what Philly does with, what they look like next year. That's one where
it would have been a good matchup in these finals this year.
Yeah.
If the Simmons thing didn't go where it did.
Right.
Because, Simmons, I don't know what they're going to do with him, but if they can get him right and figure out a way to make this work, the biggest strength to him still is that he's probably the best Giannis counter you can imagine. And then, he's obviously a great Tatum counter. He had trouble with Trae Young, but ideally that's not what you want him to be doing anyway. But across the board, for the most part, most versatile defender in the league. And you just have to figure out the offensive end. And unfortunately, I think it's probably too late for that.
At least in Philly. I think he might just need a change of scenery. I don't know what that might be, where that might be, but
would it be Portland?
I doubt it.
There's my transition point.
There you go. Professional segue.
Damian Lillard seemed a week ago. So I didn't see who initially reported this. Who started the Damian Lillard noise? Because obviously his guy Haynes there came out and suppressed it a little bit, said it could happen, and then Lillard really shut it down after that. Where did the rumors start with Lillard?
Well, it's been out there pretty much since they lost in the first round to Denver, but there was a report from True Hoop, Henry Abbott, the Friday morning that he was going to request a trade in the coming days. And then he did the sit-down interview with Haynes later that morning where they said that he would address that rumor at his Team USA media availability. But he said basically like in the Haynes interview, he basically walked right up to the line of requesting a trade without actually requesting a trade. It was, like he basically said like, we're not good enough, or I'm on the wrong side of 30. And then in that his Team USA media availability, which I was on, he basically, the best way I would put it is what he said basically was, I'm not requesting a trade yet. That's probably the way that I would describe the situation at this point. I think they have a year. I think we're going to know a lot more after the Olympics, because we're not going to hear anything more about this in the next few weeks, because right now Dame is over in Japan with the national team. But they're going to get back, I think, like the second week of August, right around the time the summer league starts. And by then, most of the big, free agency and, off-season moves are going to be done. And so then Dame is going to come back from Japan, and we're going to see, did Neil Olshey do anything major to, overhaul the roster, and make the kind of upgrades that Dame wants, or did he just kind of decide to run it back? And then at that point, who knows what the conversation is going to be. I don't even if Dame were to go into Neil Olshey's office later this summer and say, trade me, I don't think it's going to happen this summer, because I don't think that, that he's got 4 years left on his deal. They're not really under any pressure to do anything right now. They can, and they can just like try to run it, try to make it work for a year and then see where his head, like maybe they make a run. Maybe Neil Olshey is right and Chauncey Billups is such an upgraded head coach that this team that has Carmelo Anthony and Enes Kanter is going to go for, as part of your major rotation, is going to go from being a terrible defensive team to being maybe Neil Olshey is right about that. Who knows? But I think that, and the other thing about it is, I just knowing everything about Dame and the way that he's wired and the way that he kind of handles this kind of stuff, if he asks for a trade this summer and they don't do it, I don't think he's going to do the James Harden thing and like make it into a distraction and make it into a problem and make it so that you have to trade him because it's too untenable for him to stay. I think it's going to be more like when Chris Paul wanted a trade from New Orleans. He asked for the trade in the summer of 2010, the same summer that like LeBron and all them went to Miami. They didn't trade him. He addressed it at training camp. And then he showed up and he did his job and he was a professional, and they made that playoff run where they had that competitive first round series with the Lakers. And then the next offseason, they were able to get the deal done with the Clippers. I think that if I had to guess how this goes with Portland, that would be how I would guess that it happens. I don't think that Dame, and he said himself, somebody asked him on the Zoom whether he expects to be in Portland next season, and he said yes. So I understand that like those rumors are out there, and so like fans of every team are like doing the jersey photoshops and like the trade proposals. I don't think anything is going to happen with him this offseason.
Yeah, maybe just planting the seeds to some degree. And I think what you probably saw with that trade demand report is the softer message he was sending the Haynes there, getting, bridged into, all right, this is a trade demand here, which maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but it didn't come off that way in the piece and certainly not in the interview there. The tricky thing with Portland, obviously, I think they still have the highest, it's either them or the Warriors just have the highest payroll in the league. You have Yusuf Nurkic, who I think is a nice offensive center, obviously doesn't bring it on the defensive end like they needed to, and Enes Kanter certainly isn't doing that behind him. Robert Covington, I think, is probably like that last-ditch move you would have thought to try to address the defensive concerns on this team, and it really just didn't work out with him. So now you're lacking some picks because of that trade. If you're trading CJ, you're probably selling low to some degree. I just don't think you'll get a haul for him. So really, like this team's last-ditch effort here might be is if they could trap Philly, swing Simmons, he saves the defense, and that just kind of is a new identity team, because you know what this team's going to look like. They're going to be a playoff team with a high-powered offense who struggles on defense and is probably a first or second round exit. And that's kind of where they've been stuck here for a couple of years ever since their good defensive wings left.
I think Dame has kind of realized that too.
Yeah.
Because remember, he signed the extension after the Western Conference Finals run in 2019. And I think his thought at the time was, we caught some breaks. We made a run. We'll catch some breaks and make a run again. And, we can just build on this. And I think the next 2 years, the first round loss to the Lakers in the bubble and the loss to Denver this year, I think especially Game 5 of the Denver series this year was kind of clarifying to him about, he had literally one of the best individual playoff performances in recent history. And they still lost to a team that was starting Facundo Campazzo and Austin Rivers in the backcourt and then went on to lose the series. And I think he's kind of realized that, I don't think that any of this talk of him wanting to leave is about him not, wanting to leave Portland or about wanting to get to a bigger market or any of that. I think if it were up to him, he would be one of those guys that plays his entire career with one franchise. And it's not about, do they end up getting a ring? It's, do they have a chance? I think he would be perfectly satisfied if he ended up being John Stockton in Utah or Reggie Miller in Indy, where they don't end up winning, but they come close a bunch of times. They make the finals. They're always in the mix every year. I think that what he doesn't want is to be Kevin Garnett in Minnesota, where he has this incredible career and is the greatest player in franchise history, but they never even really have a real chance to compete. Because even the year that they made the conference finals, the first round they faced the Thunder and Paul George was playing with 2 messed up shoulders. And then, that Denver team they played in the second round was just kind of young and not ready. And that was the first time that group had been in the playoffs at all. And then even, they get to the conference finals, they get swept by Golden State without Kevin Durant. So even though they got to the conference finals, they can hang their hat on making the conference finals, but it's not like they can look at that and say, we were really close to making the finals, because they really weren't. And I think Dame, especially then after the way the playoffs went the next 2 years, I think Dame is kind of realizing that this is just what it's going to be if things stay the way they are. And so I think that some of the comments that he made in that press conference and also in the Chris Haynes interview were trying to put pressure on Neil Olshey to actually really shake. I mean, really the model, and I'm hesitant to call anything a model because, you can't just say oh, the Bucks won the title, so what's the Bucks model? Every other team needs to follow that.
I threw that question in the trash.
As if every team just has Giannis.
That was in the draft.
But I think what Dame can look at from there, from what the Bucks did, was they knew they had this one of the greatest players they've ever had. They know that they have this MVP caliber, top 10. They have this guy. They know that there's a chance he might, with his contract situation, he might want to leave, and so they push all their chips in to do that trade for Drew Holiday. And even if they had lost to Brooklyn in the second round, and there would be all this kind of talk of maybe that was too much to give up, and maybe it didn't work out, they still took the swing. They still tried to do something big and see whether it worked out. And obviously in this case, it worked out because they took the swing. I think Dame would like Neil Olshey to take a swing. I know what specific trade that is. I don't know.
That's the thing. I mean, they used some of that ammunition on Covington. His
well,
value
right.
kind of decreased, and then
the thing is, CJ is probably the only
here, but
CJ is the only real piece that they have to trade. And I think if Neil Olshey can help it, he won't trade CJ. I just don't think he wants to do that. And I don't see the Simmons thing happening for a couple of reasons. I understand, I get, on paper, it's a good deal. It makes sense. I kind of see it from both sides. I see how it makes sense. But practically speaking, I don't think Philly wants to trade Simmons to Portland unless it's for Dame. I think if they had the choice between CJ and stuff for Simmons or Simmons and stuff for Dame, I don't think they're going to play that card to get CJ now when they don't know if that's necessarily going to make them title contenders, whereas getting Dame they would feel would. So I don't know how open Philly is going to be to that. And then from the Portland perspective, I know that on the court, the fit between Simmons and Dame is awesome, and it would just be incredible on both ends of the floor. I think Simmons would do so much for them defensively, and you could run pick and roll with him and Dame. It would be awesome. From a personality standpoint, and from some of the stuff that's kind of come up with Simmons during this last playoffs, where there's questions about the work ethic, there's questions about kind of mentally, does he kind of have the mentality that somebody like Dame has? over the course of Dame's time in Portland, there have been a bunch of guys that he has sort of had to babysit and take under his wing and really stay on in order to get the most out of them. Nurkic obviously comes to mind, coming from Denver with some of the attitude questions that he had at the time and then what he turned into in Portland. Hassan Whiteside is a guy that they put his locker next to Dame's on purpose because they wanted Dame to be a good influence on him.
You're missing a big one. Melo.
Well, I don't even know. I think Melo was just like happy to get back in the league. I don't think that was like
he had to adjust.
He did, but I don't think that was like a project that Dame had to take on. I think Melo came in there open. Like that's a little bit of a different thing than somebody like Nurkic or Whiteside. But at this, and I think in the past, Dame has been pretty open to doing that because it's part of, being what the kind of leader that he is like, that's part of the job. But I think with all the stuff that he's saying about like what his priorities are now, he just kind of wants to win. He's on the wrong side of 30. I think if you go to Dame and say, we have another guy who's and probably the most talented player you've ever played with, but we have another guy that's going to have to be, babysat as far as like the personality stuff. I don't know if Dame would be too psyched about that at this point in his career. I think when he was younger, he would have embraced that. But I think at this point, I don't know if that would really, as talented as Simmons is and as good as the fit is on the court, I think the personality stuff is a little bit more of a factor there in terms of maybe Dame wouldn't be as stoked on that and I don't know this directly from Dame, but I just, I've covered him long enough here in Portland and I know, enough, I'm kind of able to, I know enough people around him and kind of see, how he approaches things. I don't know if Simmons necessarily would be the thing that would make Dame decide, okay, I want to stay.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky matchup across the board here because, CJ doesn't solve what Philly's looking for here. And you just mentioned all the problems that would possibly come with Simmons going back to Portland. And who knows? Like my thing with, we kicked around Simmons to Boston a little bit last week just for fun. And my biggest thing is, you don't know if like there's anything left there at all. Like, did this playoffs just destroy him mentality wise? And has he just completely declined in that regard to the point where there's not much to salvage here? He just kind of has to go to like a, Orlando, a Houston, that kind of team that just get things right here with no stakes. I don't know. So in terms of the packages that could come back to Portland, and really Dame's destination here too, because obviously he'll have some level of say in where he ends
I don't
up
think it's going to happen this offseason, so I don't know how useful it even is to talk about like fake trades right now, because it's like I look like and the other thing is like I look around at like the teams that would be able would maybe
the next one isn't great.
The Knicks one isn't great. Like, I mean, everybody's talking about like, I mean, it's obviously like the same teams that are kind of always in the mix for, these types of guys, whether it's like New York, LA, Miami. Like the Knicks package isn't great. The Lakers have nothing because they have
the
no
Miami
picks.
One's gone to hell.
The Miami one is like what? Like Tyler Hero and Precious Achua is going to get you Dame? I don't think so. Like
they can't even sign and trade Robinson at this point. Yeah,
I think
Bam
would have to be in the deal, and I don't know if that's a workable thing from Miami's standpoint.
Yeah.
But that's what it would.
So here's the one that everyone's the best player feasibly that they could probably get back in this. And yes, this includes Simmons to me. Jaylen Brown.
I've heard that before. I've heard people suggest that. I think that is probably unless Bam is on the table from Miami, that's probably the best player that you could get.
So
feasibly. If I were Boston, as great as Dame is, I kind of like the idea of just like letting this like this year. Obviously, like this year was a huge disappointment for them. I kind of think with teams like them and Toronto that like went deep in the playoffs last year, you kind of just have to throw this last year out just because it was so messed up with COVID stuff. And
I would have thought that, but all of a sudden Ainge isn't the GM anymore. Stevens isn't the coach anymore. And it's like, all right, what's going on under here?
I mean, maybe you just needed to shake things. I don't know. Like I like the bringing Al Horford back. I think that's gonna help. I liked that move a lot. I especially like both the getting off of Kemba part and the bringing back Horford part. I think the Celtics will be better next year. If I were
trying to point at the jersey, it's weird. There we go.
If I were, that's a Horford jersey. Okay,
yes.
I see that. On paper, I mean, yeah, like I understand that, like, whenever one of these big name guys like Dame is rumored to be available, it's easy to just kind of throw out these trade packages. I don't think it's going to happen this offseason.
Yeah, it's too hard. And this is what I keep telling Celtics people is that they imagine this Brown Lillard swap. And from Portland's perspective, if you're going to trade Lillard, you need
I would need Marcus
one of the
Smart
biggest
also.
returns ever. Yeah,
I would need Brown, Smart, and picks if I was Neil Olshey, and I don't think Boston's going to do that.
Yeah, that's a lot from the guard perspective, especially where they're at. And then picks, I'd be asking for 3.
Yeah, all
6.
As many picks as Drew Holiday, or if Drew Holiday got you 5 picks, like what's Dame? I don't know. I don't think there's really any trade out there. And the other part of like Dame not being maybe necessarily traded this offseason, and this is something that I think has really not talked about at all outside of Portland. At some point in the next, I don't know, I've heard it could be tomorrow. I've heard that Jody Allen could be hanging on until the next TV deal and the expansion money and all of that. The team is going to get sold because she's controlled the team ever since Paul Allen died, and she is not really interested in owning the team long term. The team is going to get sold at some point in the next few years. And if you're buying a team, or if you're first of all, if you're buying a team, you want to have a guy like Dame who is going to sell tickets and sell jerseys and people are going to be excited. And if you're selling a team, you're going to be able to get more if you have that guy already in place.
Good point.
So I think just from a lot of perspectives, not just how much time he has left on his contract. There's the sales stuff that's kind of looming in the background. I don't know when that could happen, but it's going to happen at some point. And just there's not an obvious trade out there that makes sense that would be like, okay, you have to do this. That this is where he wanted. Like with Houston, Harden only wanted to go to one team, and they still got a ton back. Or like even New Orleans, like Anthony Davis only wanted to go to the Lakers, and they still got a lot back. Like I got back 3 like legit rotation players, including one guy who has turned into an all-star and 1 million picks. Like when the time comes to trade Dame, they're going to be able to get a lot.
Yeah,
I just don't think that's this offseason that is going to be the time to do it. I think they have a year, and it's going to be dependent on what Neil Olshey does. Maybe he doesn't do anything. I know, as I said before, he really doesn't want to trade CJ. I think he would like to not trade CJ and just hope that you bring in his coach, his handpicked coach, which, I mean, that's a whole other discussion, the whole Chauncey Billups thing. But like, you bring in his coach and you hope that Nurkic and McCollum are more healthy than they were last year, and that's going to be enough. That if I had to guess how this plays out, I think that's going to be the approach that Neil Olshey takes. But I think Dame also made it clear that's not going to be enough for him.
So you haven't been crazy about the job Olshey's done here, especially when it comes to this Chauncey situation, which I talked to A. Sherrod Blakely about, especially when he was in the Celtics running.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people in Celtics land thought that could be a real concern, the accusations against Chauncey in the past. And when you saw the presser play out,
it was not a good look.
It was bad and then some.
I'll be honest with you. Like,
now we have a report too that they didn't
actually vet any the stuff even as much as Neil said that it was when they that the whole situation is. And I'll be honest with you, as somebody who follows this stuff like all the time, and it's my job to follow this stuff 24/7. When Dame said that he liked Jason Kidd, I knew right away that was going to be a non-starter because everybody knows about Jason Kidd's like off-court stuff and his background.
It's amazing that he's the man in Dallas now.
Well, I mean, we already know kind of how that organization feels about that sort of stuff and how they just don't really. But
yes,
but I knew that was probably going to be a non-starter for Portland just because Dame's, or just because Kidd's stuff was so out there. Neil Olshey was only ever going to hire Chauncey Billups. Like, it's cool that Becky Hammon got an interview and Mike D'Antoni got an interview, and there were other people who were rumored to be in the mix. I had heard as far back as February that Chauncey Billups was going to be Neil's guy. Because Neil was the GM of the Clippers back in 2011 when they brought Chauncey in to back up Chris Paul kind of near the end of his career. So they have a relationship going back that far. And I mean, that's just, and if it weren't for the allegation and the stuff that kind of resurfaced, there's a case. I mean, given how he was as a player and, the reputation that he had and how respected he was as a leader, there's a good case to make that Chauncey Billups will probably be a pretty good coach. It's just the handling of the allegation, the handling of the investigation. Like I said, I follow this stuff 24/7. I had no idea about this allegation against Chauncey from 1997 until maybe 6 weeks ago when he started to get linked to some of these head coaching jobs. And then people started to bring it back up because it happened before social media, before all this stuff was out there.
Bob Ryan didn't know. That's when I really was like, what was going on in Boston, 97?
Well, also at the time when he was a rookie, he bounced around a few different places early on in his career before he got to Detroit and really became a star. He wasn't a player that anybody cared about back then. And it was a time before everything was just available on the internet and everybody was talking about this stuff all the time. I can totally understand why this story just got buried at the time. But then, it coming back up, and look, I am not really interested in relitigating looking at the details of this case and deciding whether I think Chauncey did this thing that he was accused of or not. I don't think it's really my place to do that. I also don't really think it's my place to say that anybody that's ever accused of anything should never be allowed to get a job or work in the NBA again. I don't think that's really up to me to say one way or the other. But if I were running a coaching search and my options were hire somebody that has this in their background and have to deal with all of the questions and the scrutiny and all of this stuff that the Blazers have had to deal with over the last couple of weeks since they hired him, or just hire somebody else and you don't have to worry about this at all and you can just talk about whether the new coach you hired is going to be a better basketball coach, you could just hire somebody else. It's really not that, literally as long as you don't hire Chauncey Billups or Jason Kidd, you're probably fine. And then your press conference goes a totally different way. And then also, if you do decide, what, we looked into this allegation, we're still comfortable with it, then you have to let them sit up there and answer every single question that anybody has about it. You can't say that the investigation was proprietary and then it comes out later that you didn't even contact the accuser's attorney about it. You can't have that happen. You can't shut down a question that another reporter, I was the one that asked the question about the investigation. You can't, and then another Jason Quick at The Athletic asked the question to Chauncey that got shut down by the moderator. You can't shut down any question. If you're going to hire him, you have to be prepared to sit up there and take every single one of those questions and answer them in a way that will make people happy. And maybe some people will never be happy with it. And that's totally understandable and probably fair, but you have to at least, be willing, even if you just say, we're going to address it today and then we're not going to address it again, you have to actually address it. You can't just kind of give that opening statement where they basically acknowledge that it exists, but don't actually say anything about it. And then just shut down any follow-up questions about it. And if you don't feel comfortable with him answering those questions, then why are you offering him a job where he's a front-facing, face of your organization, where a big part of his job is going to be talking to the media? If you don't feel comfortable having him answer a question at a press conference, you can't offer him the job in the first place.
Yeah, it could come up again in the future, and it probably will continue to be discussed over
now
time.
It will. Well, now it will. I think it probably would have gone away if it weren't for this NPR report now, or OPB rather, the public radio station here in Portland, that the investigation was not as thorough. Now, the next time Neil Olshey talks, and who knows when the next time he's going to talk is, I think he's probably trying to lay low for a while. He only talks 2 or 3 times a year as it is. I think he's probably not going to talk on draft night because they don't have a pick, but he's probably going to lay low for a while or as long as he can. But next time he talks, it's going to have to come up that he said the investigation was thorough and there's now been reporting that it wasn't. And now he's going to have to answer for that. So I think this isn't going to go away.
It'll make it harder to swing that big deal for Dame. It's not a great situation there right now.
It's really not.
It's been a nice team and situation in recent years too. So it is too bad to see it kind of crumble the way it has, or start to crumble in the recent months here. But yeah, every bit of context matters with that Billups thing, and when you consider the whole Hammond interview process too on top of that, and their relative experiences, you can make the assumption that Billups is going to be a great coach. But if you just look at the credentials in terms of coaching, you really are throwing a lot of accusations, inexperience, and all kinds of other stuff.
Well, I think they thought that it would just be like they would get applauded for just having her get to the final round. Like I said, it's nice that she got an interview. She was never going to get the job because Chauncey Billups was the only person Neil Olshey was ever seriously considering because they have a relationship going back. But then, there's just the optics of giving a woman basically a fake interview for PR purposes and then hiring somebody that has that specific type of allegation in their background it's not a good look. But this, to me, it's not even about Becky Hammon to me. Like, Mike D'Antoni would have been a fine choice. There's so many people. Like, Neil talked at his end of season press conference when he said that, the first round exit wasn't a product of the roster. He's talked about wanting to get better defensively. If you want a, experienced defensive coach, Steve Clifford is out there. You could have gone and gotten him. If you want to go the Chauncey Billups archetype or like the archetype of some of these other, hires that have happened over this coaching cycle of the young, up and coming, not white, first time assistant, call Ime Udoka before he takes the Celtics job. He's from Portland. He probably would have had interest. Call Wes Unseld Jr. Call, I don't know, Jamal.
One of those Bucks guys.
Yeah. Like Charles Lee. Like there's so many people you could have called. Like, it's not even just about they didn't hire Becky. I mean, I understand why people are making it about Becky Hammon because she was touted as being a finalist, but there's so many people you could have called where your press conference could have been about how great of a coach they're going to be and not about having to answer for allegations from 25 years ago that you say that you vetted and then you didn't. Like, there's so many better ways that you could have handled it, but Neil Olshey had to get his guy.
He is Sean Highkin. Read him at Bleacher Report. Follow him at Summer League. You're going to be out at Summer League in early August, which is going to be hot.
Are you going?
I hope. I'm like making the mad last ditch scramble here. We'll see.
Yeah.
Not going to count on it.
I'll be there the first 4 days or so.
All right, awesome.
That'll be the first place I fly since COVID. I haven't flown since the last flight I was on was the All-Star game in Chicago in February of 2020.
We're gonna rely on you for Yam Madar updates out there with the Boston Celtics. So keep a close eye on him.
We'll see about that. Yeah.
All right, Sean Highkin, thank you so much for being here on Dome Theory.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.